Money, 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 money.
Oh, that's right.
Yes. This is your time to shine, Gons.
A crypto? Do I look like I know what a crypto is?
I love the Great Reset.
Don't you love the Great Reset?
Love it. Love the Great Reset.
So there's an institution, an organization. It's called the SEC. Don't know if you've heard of it. It's the Security and Exchange Commission. And I feel like we need to pay attention to it a little bit more, but it's not one of those exciting topics that you can cover all the time. So I wanted to do a little bit of a run through because it's...
Sure. I mean, we talk about it. We've mentioned it. But, people don't... I don't know. I don't even really know a whole lot about it.
Sure. So according to Investopia here, there's a brief history. This is all in the show notes, so you guys can go through all the details here. But basically, back in 1911, Kansas enacted the Blue Sky Laws, which enabled your average Joe to start investing. And but there was some problems because there are a lot of scammers. So they enacted these laws to kind of help with some of the the scammers to not scam, but didn't work really well because a lot of scams were bought. Black Tuesday happens October 29th, 1929, which leads to the Great Depression of the 20s and in the 30s, and then in 1933, Basil.
Oh, this is convenient.
Yeah, two important things happened. The Glass-Steagall Act was established to keep banks from tying themselves up in the stock market and prevent them from hanging themselves in the case of a crash.
Well,
and
yes.
You can't fail is basically the act there. And then the Securities Act, which is intended to create a stronger version of the state blue sky laws at the federal level. And a year later, in June of 1934, the official Securities Exchange Act was signed and the SEC was born. And their whole thing is to, just protect investors is what they say. And in this article here, it says, why was the SEC created? It says, following the stock market crash in October 1929, Congress met to search for and identify a means of restoring public confidence in the U.S. markets. Based on its research, Congress passed the Securities Act in 1933, followed by the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, the latter of which established the SEC. Okay, just want to do a quick background so people understand that this is a thing. It's been around almost 100 years. And so keep that in mind. And
I want to also compare this, or just put it in the same time frame as what we've been referring to, especially because of the SCOTUS decision recently on the EPA. This is when the administrative state really got its bearings, really started. This was early administrative state. And by administrative state, we're talking about unelected bureaucratic agencies having control, mandating, basically not making laws, but having the power as if what they decree is a law. Right. And this is right during that time, really, maybe even one of the first examples of it, and of this administrative state that is sort of starting to be dismantled by the Supreme Court right now. Right.
And that's sort of the punchline. I'll give it now before we actually do the stories, because I think it's more useful to have the punchline to go, beforehand to go through. So I found this article from ballotopia.org, and it's Economy and Society, July 5th, 2022, SCOTUS ruling impact on SEC. And we've been covering, a lot of the SCOTUS stuff and how I think did we do the whole story about the EPA? I don't remember if we actually covered it or we mentioned it.
Yeah, we didn't go deep, but we covered it.
We've covered ESG since last, or probably longer than that in terms of the actual thing, but, called ESG, at least in the last year, which is the environmental, social and governance measurements or whatever, just to see how compliant you are to climate change stuff. And basically in recent rulings, the Supreme Court limited the power of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, right, of the United States. And so they won't have the ability to sort of control or say much about allowing. Oh, let me just read this. This is just much easier to read. According to some ESG commentators, the ruling, which is about the EPA, raises questions about the Securities and Exchange Commission's authority to demand corporate disclosure of climate change related information. Those questions are in addition to existing others analysts have asked about the SEC's mandates, including many that were expressed in the public comments posted in response to the SEC's proposed rule. If under the major questions doctrine, some have argued the EPA is not allowed to regulate CO2 without the specific mandate from Congress, then the SEC's power to do something similar could potentially be questioned. So a couple things to point out. SEC is getting ready to basically provide this decree that all companies must disclose their climate change related information. And we shall police thee, and we will let you know if you are worthy to exist or not, right? That whole thing. And it's being pushed back by SCOTUS because it's part of this more globalist agenda, which is interesting.
Yeah. It's like our Supreme Court is literally pushing back against the Great Reset. Or at least the global part, version of the Great Reset.
Right.
Which is what we've talked about before. Everybody has their own version of the Great Reset.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, it's almost like they're fighting for positioning. Exactly. It's like there's only so many chairs and everyone's fighting for a seat.
Yep.
Okay, so giving that context, I have a few stories to cover here. This first one is from Bloomberg, and the headline here: ex-Coinbase manager arrested in U.S. crypto insider trading case. And this is a big deal. Yesterday, all the crypto channels were talking about it. U.S. authorities arrested a former Coinbase Global Inc. product manager for allegedly leaking insider information to help his brother and a friend buy tokens just before they were listed on the crypto exchange, according to people familiar with the matter. The move on Thursday to detain Ishan Wahi, who helped oversee listings for Coinbase unit focused on investment products, follows a sweeping probe that involved prosecutors in the Southern District of New York and the Securities and Exchange Commission. There they are. They're there. They're doing things in the wild. The exchange operator wasn't a focus of the probe and won't face charges, the people said. The people said. Wahi tipped off his brother Nikhil Wahi and friend Samir Ramini when tokens were about to be listed by the exchange, according to another person who, like the others, asked for anonymity because the probe hadn't been publicly disclosed. Nikhil Wahi and Ramini, who are also subjects of the government's investigation, allegedly used that information to trade dozens of tokens from at least June 2021 until April 2022 for a profit of more than $1 million, that person said.
Now, why is the SEC getting in on this?
It's because they have named some of the assets that they traded as securities. This article doesn't actually mention that the names of the coins, but the SEC actually, in this case, came out and said, these coins are securities, the ones that these guys were trading. Now, that's really interesting because there is no clarity on this issue about what a security is. And crypto is actually throwing a big wrench into the whole SEC's plans for controlling all monetary activity.
Yeah.
Because anybody can jump in and start a crypto and, release a coin. And certainly if you look at the law, the security laws, and there's a thing called the Howey test, which basically measures to see if you're a security or not based on, the 1933 thing. A lot of companies, a lot of crypto projects probably do fall under security, but not everything. And, it's a big debate. There's a big philosophical debate, but the SEC is like, no, we're just declaring these things as securities, which is interesting. It's almost like a flex. They're trying to flex their power.
And again, it's bureaucratic. It's not this is the type of thing that Congress should decide with public debate,
right,
and make a law, not just some organization that has, power hungry, unelected bureaucrats in it.
So that's really interesting. And then there's this article here from Reuters: U.S. SEC working to register crypto lending firms. All right, so more in the interesting developments of cases like Celsius
thing.
Yeah,
right.
The Celsius Network thing, which is a big mess and bankruptcy and, makes me cry. And then there's also this story from Fox, which I thought was interesting because the SEC is rattled in this big lawsuit, which is the XRP Ripple case. We got some Ripple people out there. I think it's called like the XRP Army or something. I don't know. But Fox Business here, the headline, District Judge calls out SEC for hypocrisy in Ripple lawsuit. And this lawsuit's been going on for a couple of years, at least a year, maybe a little longer. And, it's the details get a little murky, so I don't want to go through everything, but I'll read a little bit. A federal judge in Manhattan has accused Wall Street's top cop of hypocrisy over its litigation tactics in a case that's being called the cryptocurrency trial of the century. The characterization comes as U.S. Magistrate Judge Sarah Netburn, interesting last name for the situation here, Netburn, ruled against a motion by the Securities and Exchange Commission in its lawsuit against cross-border payments company Ripple Labs. The SEC has accused the crypto platform of illegally issuing an unregistered security, XRP, to build out its business and make company insiders rich. The SEC is seeking to keep confidential documents relating to a speech given by a former SEC official in 2018 when he sought to provide clarity on the then nascent cryptocurrency market. Then it gets into the details of this whole thing. And basically, the SEC is not releasing some of the information. And there's the characterization by Judge Netburn here. This is the quote. The hypocrisy in arguing to the court, on the one hand, that the speech is not relevant to the market's understanding of how or whether the SEC will regulate cryptocurrencies, and on the other hand, that Hinman, who's this guy, the ex-CEO of the SEC, well, not CEO, what was it? Who is he? I think he was one of the previous members of the SEC. Hinman sought to obtain legal advice from SEC counsel in drafting his speech, suggests that the SEC is adapting its litigation positions to further its desired goal and not out of a faithful allegiance to the law, end quote, Netburn said. Pretty startling stuff because basically the SEC's changing their legal position on some of these issues about whether they had influence in, certain people's speeches, or was it just his opinion? And, it just gets into some messy territory there. So there's just this long dragged out case here with Ripple. We'll see what happens. Although there's another cryptocurrency, EOS, that paid billions of dollars to basically not be considered a security. Yeah.
Which is kind of how it went. It was almost like, because, I had my own experiences in the early days of the token cryptocurrencies. Mm-hmm. And, you really kind of had to jump through some hoops at the early days of the SEC trying to crack down. But you could do it. It just was very expensive, which you got to remember the SEC as a elected bureaucratic, agency similar to the FDA. The FDA is funded by the very companies that they are meant to regulate. They get 70% of their funding from big pharma. And in the same way, the SEC, I would expect, I don't know the exact numbers, but I would expect that the SEC gets a lot of their funding straight from, the same companies they're supposed to be regulating.
Right. Yep. And also this pertains to us in a sense because we use Odyssey as one of our platforms where we're streaming. The SEC has been in a legal case against Library, which LBRY, which was basically the company that was doing video streaming before Odyssey. I mean, I think they spun off and started Odyssey. But basically, they accused Library of selling securities, and they really went after him. And it's interesting that they chose Library because they weren't really big. Like they were not well known. It was just like a project that was out there. But for some reason, the SEC thought it was worthy enough to drag them into court. And I think it's because a platform like Library or Odyssey has a true potential to really dethrone the YouTubes and stuff, of information flow.
In theory, yeah.
in
They're
theory.
at least not controllable in the same way.
Right.
Or they're not, their allegiances don't lie in the same sort of legacy authorities as the others, as YouTube, for instance.
Right. So, as much as we don't want to talk about crypto on the channel or on the podcast here, it's becoming it's being used as an opportunity for the SEC to flex, and we'll see what happens, because as they flex, it's almost like things were dormant, and now that the Supreme Court is starting to act on some of these conservative swings, these organizations will start to act up. They're going to throw tantrums, and I don't know if that's a good thing. As we saw
with CDC and FDA.
Yeah,
they did the same thing when they started getting threatened. They had to decide, like, okay, are we going to back off? Do we tighten our control even more? And that's when you get quotes from people like Fauci when he says masks on planes is not about this. Now, this is an indirect quote, but he was talking about, and this is a paraphrase of what Fauci said. There's clips of it. I should bring the clips. I forgot we're still on YouTube. You start talking about Fauci on YouTube, we're going to get
that's
in trouble. But he literally said, masks on planes is not, is nothing, how can I say this safely on YouTube? He says masks on planes, at least in part, is about who has the authority to say it. Who has the authority and who can maintain the authority to mandate masks on planes?
It's a talisman.
And that was his thing. He's kind of said, like, it's not even really about should or shouldn't we wear masks. It's about setting a precedent for who has the authority to tell us either way. And that's what, he was talking about the CDC, trying to hold on to that unelected power, or give it up. It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you off. I do have a very interesting update on this. Not in the context of crypto, if it would help non-crypto people.
Sure.
This just came across my desk here from Axios, and it's titled "A Radical Plan for Trump's Second Term."
Oh,
so it's
this
in the
has
context,
something to do with the SEC, huh?
Well, it has to do with the administrative state. The SEC is included. The IRS is included. The EPA is included. All these same, organizations we've been talking about.
Yeah. Before you go on, sure. I did send out a tweet kind of summarizing this idea, and John Haller, our friend over in Ohio, lawyer, he responded and said, like, that, because I said basically that the SEC might be eradicated. They might end, or at least be completely changed. And his whole thing was that won't happen unless there's a change in administration. Yeah. And so to your point, if Trump does come in, because, the conservative swing is, they were suppressed for so long. It's going to be a long swing back the other way, And
let me give you the reason why is because, every new administration that comes in, they usually get to replace about 4,000 political appointees. And these are specifically sort of the liaisons between the White House and organizations like EPA, IRS, blah, blah, blah. There's hundreds of them. There's ones you haven't even heard about, alphabet agencies that, regulate weird, tiny little things we don't even think about.
Podcasts, disinformation podcasts.
The Disinformation Governance Board would have been one of them.
Would have.
And so there's about 4,000 of these liaisons that get to trade out. But it has been revealed former President Trump's top allies are preparing to radically reshape the federal government if he is elected, purging potentially thousands of civil servants and filling career posts with loyalists to him and his America First ideology. People involved in the discussions tell Axios.
Oh no, people with American ideologies in places of American government?
The impact could go well beyond typical conservative targets, such as the Environmental Protection Agency and the Internal Revenue Service. Trump allies are working on plans that could potentially strip layers at the Justice Department, That's another one. We don't really think about it, but it is filled with unelected regulatory stuff, including the FBI, another example of unelected, bureaucrats, and reaching into national security, intelligence, the State Department, the Pentagon, sources close to. So, these are it says here, during his presidency, Trump often complained about what he called the deep state. And we've said it here. These bureaucratic agencies, they are like the most easy way to understand the deep state.
Right.
Hillary Clinton is not the deep state. It's the thousands of, people who are supposed to be non-political actors who are just basically bureaucrats, office workers. There's 2 million of them, 2 million of these employees that work for these agencies. The heart of the plan is derived from an executive order known as Schedule F. Had you heard about this?
Heard of Schedule F.
Yeah, it's been kind of bandied about recently. Yeah. And I remember, but this will tell you why you haven't heard a lot about it. Developed and refined in secret over most of the second half of Trump's term and launched just 13 days before the 2020 election. The reporting for this series draws on blah, 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 blah. Anyways, there was a little bit of reporting about Schedule F, but it was right before January 6th. And so January 6th cut it off. The long story short is he's, a regular president who comes in. They get to change out about 4,000 people. Mm-hmm. There are straight up plans to replace 50,000 federal workers if Trump gets back, in power. Here's a couple of highlights I had. Such pendulum swings, talking about, Trump changing out 50,000 deep state workers. Such pendulum swings and politicization could threaten the continuity and quality of service to taxpayers. So this is the threat. This is why Trump's the threat. Because changing out all these people, you think it's a pain now to call the IRS and whatever, check your files or something. Imagine if half the whole organization are new people who just got in there. The regulatory protections, the checks on executive power, and other aspects of American democracy. Trump's allies claim such pendulum swings will not happen because they will not have to fire anything close to 50,000 federal workers to achieve the result, as one source put it, of, quote, behavior change.
A lot of talk about behavior around here.
Firing a smaller segment of bad apples among the career officials at each agency would have the desired chilling effect on others tempted to obstruct Trump's orders. They say Schedule F will finally end the farce of a nonpartisan civil service that they say has been filled with activist liberals who have been undermining GOP presidents for decades. So this is interesting. Because Trump allegedly, according to this reporting, has plans to act on what the Supreme Court is doing. Now, remember, a bunch of these Supreme Court people, justices, are Trump, electees or Trump appointees, rather. Mm-hmm. So you can almost see how this plan has been going on for a while.
It's almost like he meant to lose in 2020 so he can stretch out his.
Oh, so he can redo his,
instead of trying to figure it all out in 8 years,
chess, man,
doing it in 12,
He gets his one, term, then gets voted out, gets to use that as ammo while his Supreme Court make a bunch of changes,
lays the red carpet for him to walk down,
and then he can come in and really drain the swamp. Now, of course, that sounds interesting. It sounds like an interesting change up compared to what we've seen in America. But you could see when they talk about threat to democracy, the Democrats are going to be playing this up because it's all their people at the IRS, at the this, at the that, at the EPA. It's all the Democrat people who will be at risk if this Schedule F thing gets.
To bring it back around to this crypto thing and then moving forward here, to your point, there's a lot of exposing happening, right? And so it's interesting because a lot of people are noticing that, they're going after a couple of these Coinbase employees for insider trading, when really with Coinbase, there's all kinds of rumors on Twitter and stuff before a coin is listed anyway.
Right.
That most people kind of know right before they actually list the coin. So I don't know why this is like a big deal of I guess an employee signed something. It's a little different,